We were celebrating our 10th anniversary when a waiter whispered something about my wife. That night changed everything, and she had no idea I knew. 10 years of marriage, and I thought I knew Claire better than anyone in the world. But sometimes the people closest to us are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. Palazzo's was our place, the same upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Portland where I'd proposed 9 years earlier, with its dim lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and that view of the Willamette River that made everything feel magical. Claire had insisted we celebrate there again, saying she wanted to recreate that perfect night when our future stretched out before us like an endless promise. She looked stunning in the emerald dress I'd bought her for Christmas, her auburn hair catching the candlelight as she raised her champagne flute. "To 10 more years," she said, her smile radiant as always, and I clinked my glass against hers, believing with every fiber of my being that we were the lucky ones who'd made it work. The evening started perfectly. Claire was animated and affectionate, touching my hand across the table, laughing at my terrible jokes about our early dating disasters, reminiscing about our honeymoon in Tuscany where we discovered this same Chianti we were drinking tonight. I excused myself to use the restroom, feeling that warm contentment that comes from being exactly where you belong with exactly the right person. But as I was washing my hands, our young waiter Mason approached me with a nervous energy that immediately put me on edge. "Sir, I'm really sorry to bother you," he said, glancing around to make sure we were alone, "but I need to tell you something about your wife." My first instinct was to bristle. Who was this kid to have something to say about Claire? But something in his voice, the genuine concern mixed with obvious reluctance, made me listen instead of walking away. "I saw her put something in your champagne glass while you were gone," he continued, his words coming out in a rush like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then she pulled this small packet from her purse and emptied it into your drink, stirred it with her finger, then sat back like nothing happened. The words hit me like a physical blow, my mind immediately rejecting what I was hearing because it was impossible. This was Claire, my wife of 10 years, the woman who brought me soup when I was sick and cried during Hallmark commercials. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice sounding strange even to me. "Maybe you saw someone else, or maybe she was just—" "Sir, I've been watching tables for 3 years," Mason interrupted gently. "I know what I saw, and I know this isn't normal behavior, which is why I had to say something because I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you." I stared at my reflection in the restroom mirror, seeing a man whose entire world was shifting beneath his feet, wondering how a perfect anniversary dinner had become the moment when everything I believed about my life might be a lie. I walked back to our table on unsteady legs, my mind racing as I tried to process what Mason had told me while maintaining some semblance of normalcy. Claire looked up with that same radiant smile, reaching for my hand as I sat down. "You were gone so long, honey. I was starting to worry you'd gotten lost." Her voice was warm and loving, exactly the same as it had been all evening, and for a moment I wondered if Mason had made some terrible mistake. But as I looked at her, really looked, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she suggested I drink my champagne, the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her own glass, the forced quality of her laughter that I'd attributed to anniversary nerves. "Everything okay?" she asked, tilting her head with that concerned expression I'd seen thousands of times over 10 years of marriage. "You look a little pale." My champagne glass sat exactly where I'd left it, the bubbles still rising in perfect golden streams, looking completely innocent except for Mason's words echoing in my head like a warning bell I couldn't ignore. I picked up the glass, pretending to examine the color while my heart hammered against my ribs, and Claire watched me with an intensity that felt suddenly predatory rather than affectionate. "The champagne looks different somehow," I said casually, testing her reaction. "Maybe they switched bottles or something." Her face flickered for just a fraction of a second. Surprise, calculation, then that perfect smile again. "It looks fine to me, babe. Same Dom Perignon we always order for special occasions." She raised her own glass encouragingly. "Come on, let's toast properly this time." When she excused herself to the ladies' room 5 minutes later, claiming she needed to touch up her lipstick, I knew Mason was telling the truth. I waited until she disappeared around the corner, then quickly switched our champagne flutes, my hands shaking as I realized I was potentially saving my own life while condemning the woman I'd loved for 10 years to whatever fate she'd planned for me. Claire returned with a fresh smile and immediately reached for what she thought was my glass, taking a generous sip while maintaining eye contact. Perfect, she said, then launched into a story about her sister's latest dating disaster, seeming more relaxed now that she believed her plan was in motion. I watched her carefully over the next 20 minutes, noting how her words began to slur slightly, how she blinked more slowly, how her graceful gestures became increasingly uncoordinated. "I feel a little dizzy," she said eventually, pressing her fingers to her temple. "Maybe I'm just tired from all the anniversary planning." Her speech was becoming thick and labored, and she gripped the edge of the table as if to steady herself. "Maybe we should head home," I suggested, playing the concerned husband while documenting everything with my phone's voice recorder. "You don't look well." Within another 10 minutes, Claire's head was drooping forward and her responses had become incoherent mumbling. I called for help, loudly enough for other diners to hear, and when the paramedics arrived, I rode with them to the hospital, holding Claire's limp hand while secretly hoping the blood tests would reveal exactly what substance she'd intended for me. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was genuinely worried about her condition even though she just tried to drug me, but 10 years of love don't disappear instantly, even when they're built on a foundation that's apparently made of lies. While Claire lay unconscious in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and IVs, the blood tests confirmed what I already knew but still couldn't quite believe. She'd been dosed with a powerful sedative called Rohypnol, the same drug that would have left me helpless and vulnerable to whatever she'd planned next. The doctor explained that without immediate medical intervention, the dosage could have been fatal, and I sat there processing the fact that my wife of 10 years had potentially tried to kill me on our anniversary. I told the medical staff I had no idea how she could have been drugged, playing the confused and devoted husband while my mind raced with questions that demanded answers. The next morning, while Claire was still sedated and under observation, I drove home to our Craftsman-style house in southeast Portland and began the most difficult investigation of my life. I started with her laptop, knowing her password was our wedding date, a detail that now felt like another cruel irony, and what I found in her encrypted messages made my stomach turn. The email thread between Claire and someone named Marcus stretched back 6 months, filled with intimate exchanges that left no doubt about their relationship. "I can't wait to be free of him," Claire had written just 3 days before our anniversary. "David's so trusting and predictable, he'll never see it coming." Marcus's responses were calculating and cold. "The sedative will work perfectly. He'll be unconscious for hours, giving us plenty of time to access his accounts and transfer everything before we disappear." They'd planned it all: how to drug me, how to empty our joint savings account, how to stage my death to look like a suicide so Claire could collect on my life insurance policy. I found browser history showing Claire had researched various sedatives and their effects, downloaded information about untraceable money transfers, and even looked up one-way flights to countries without extradition treaties. Her search history read like a manual for the perfect murder, with entries about making drowning look accidental and how long before someone is declared dead. The financial records told an even more devastating story. Claire had been gambling online for over a year, systematically draining our savings and racking up massive credit card debt I knew nothing about. We'd gone from having nearly $200,000 in savings to being almost $80,000 in debt, and she'd covered it up by intercepting bank statements and creating fake documents. The woman I'd trusted with everything had been methodically destroying our financial future while planning to literally destroy me. In her desk drawer, hidden beneath old tax documents, I found a folder containing forged travel documents with her new identity, detailed floor plans of our house with notes about where I kept important papers, and printed emails about offshore banking procedures. There was even a handwritten timeline showing exactly when she planned to drug me, how long she'd wait before calling 911, and what she'd tell the police about finding my suicide note. The most chilling discovery was a draft of that suicide note, written in her handwriting but designed to look like mine, expressing guilt over imaginary financial problems and apologizing for being a burden. Every detail had been planned with the cold precision of someone who'd completely disconnected from any love she might have once felt for me. I sat in our living room, surrounded by evidence of betrayal so complete it took my breath away, looking at photos from our wedding day and wondering when exactly the woman I'd married had decided I was worth more dead than alive. The next morning, I made two crucial phone calls that would determine how the rest of this nightmare played out. First, I called my brother Kevin, a detective with the Portland Police Bureau, and asked him to meet me for coffee without mentioning why over the phone. Kevin had always been suspicious of Claire's sudden interest in our finances over the past year, questioning why she'd started handling all our banking and investment decisions when she'd never shown interest before. "I knew something was off," he said after I showed him the evidence I'd gathered. "But attempted murder? Jesus, David. We need to handle this exactly right or she walks free." The second call was to Rita Chin, a private investigator Kevin recommended who specialized in marital fraud cases. Rita was a former FBI agent who'd seen every variation of spousal betrayal, and she listened to my story with the clinical detachment of someone who'd heard it all before. "Your wife's not the mastermind here," she said after reviewing Claire's communications with Marcus. "This guy's got a pattern. I can see it in how he manipulates her responses, how he escalates her commitment gradually. He's done this before." Rita's investigation into Marcus revealed a disturbing history spanning 3 states and at least 5 relationships with married women. Each time, he'd convinced his targets to betray their spouses for financial gain, sometimes through fraud, twice through insurance scams, and in one case that was still under investigation, through what authorities suspected was murder. "Marcus Williams isn't even his real name," Rita explained, showing me a thick file of aliases and criminal associations. "He targets women who are financially vulnerable or emotionally isolated, builds trust over months, then convinces them their husbands are the enemy. Your wife thinks she's in love, but she's actually a victim of psychological manipulation." While Rita gathered additional evidence, I installed monitoring software on Claire's devices and began the delicate process of pretending everything was normal. Claire returned home from the hospital weak and confused, accepting my story that someone at the restaurant must have slipped something in her drink. "I can't believe this happened to us," she said, lying in our bed with what appeared to be genuine distress. "Who would do something so horrible?" I held her hand and made sympathetic sounds while secretly recording our conversations, documenting how she continued to text Marcus about postponing their plans and waiting for the perfect opportunity to try again. The most sickening part was watching her performance. She'd researched the symptoms of Rohypnol poisoning and was perfectly mimicking the aftereffects, complaining about memory gaps and disorientation while secretly planning her next move. Kevin coordinated with the district attorney's office to build an airtight case, explaining that we needed to catch Claire in the act again to prove premeditation rather than relying solely on the circumstantial evidence I'd gathered. "We need her to commit the crime with full intent," he explained. "Otherwise, a good defense attorney could argue she was coerced or manipulated, and Marcus walks while she gets a reduced sentence." Meanwhile, Claire's behavior became increasingly erratic as she struggled to maintain her loving wife facade while communicating with Marcus about their failed plan. She'd disappear for hours claiming to run errands, return home with expensive purchases she couldn't explain, and spend late nights on her laptop claiming to be catching up on work. "I've been thinking about our future," she said one evening, curled up beside me on the couch where we'd spent countless comfortable nights over the past decade. "Maybe we should take that European vacation we've always talked about. Life's so short, and after what happened at the restaurant, I realize we shouldn't wait for tomorrow." I agreed enthusiastically, knowing that her sudden urgency about travel had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with escape routes, while secretly coordinating with law enforcement to ensure her next attempt would be her last. 3 weeks later, I suggested we return to Palazzo's for a second anniversary celebration, claiming I wanted to create better memories after our traumatic experience there. Claire's eyes lit up with what I now recognized as calculated excitement rather than romantic sentiment. "That's such a sweet idea," she said, already reaching for her phone to make reservations. "Maybe this time we can actually enjoy our evening without any drama." Kevin had coordinated with restaurant management to position hidden cameras throughout our section, while Mason, who'd been promoted to head waiter after his courage in speaking up, would be our server again. Rita's surveillance team would monitor Marcus, who they tracked to a hotel 3 blocks from the restaurant where he was waiting with a rental car and fake passports for their planned escape to Vancouver. The evening played out like a twisted replay of our original anniversary, with Claire wearing the same emerald dress and ordering the same Dom Perignon, her performance so convincing that I almost doubted what I knew to be true. She was animated and affectionate, touching my hand across the table, sharing memories of our early relationship that felt like weapons disguised as nostalgia. "I've been thinking about how lucky we are," she said, raising her champagne flute with that radiant smile. "Not everyone gets a second chance at happiness." When I excused myself to use the restroom, following the exact same script as 3 weeks earlier, the hidden cameras captured everything in high definition. Claire looked around nervously, then reached into her purse and pulled out another small packet, emptying its contents into my wine glass before stirring it with her finger and sitting back with satisfied confidence. Mason approached our table moments later, playing his role perfectly by loudly commenting on how the champagne looked cloudy and offering to bring fresh glasses, giving me the perfect opportunity to switch them again while Claire protested that everything looked fine. The irony of watching her drink her own poison a second time was lost in the adrenaline of knowing this nightmare was finally ending. Claire began showing the same symptoms within 20 minutes: slurred speech, loss of coordination, drooping eyelids. But this time I called 911 immediately, making sure other diners witnessed my apparent panic over my wife's sudden collapse. As the paramedics loaded Claire into the ambulance, police units were simultaneously arresting Marcus in the hotel parking lot, where he was found with $50,000 in cash, our joint account information, and detailed plans for fleeing the country. The coordinated arrests were the culmination of weeks of careful planning, with Rita's team providing real-time intelligence about Marcus's movements while Kevin ensured every legal protocol was followed perfectly. Claire regained consciousness in the hospital to find herself under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud, her shocked protests about being the victim falling on deaf ears as detectives presented her with the overwhelming evidence we'd gathered. "David, you have to believe me," she pleaded when I visited her in jail the next day, handcuffed to a hospital bed with a police officer standing guard. "Marcus made me do it. He said you were planning to leave me anyway, that this was the only way to protect myself." But the communications records showed a different story. Claire had been an enthusiastic participant in planning my murder, motivated by greed and the fantasy of starting over with a younger, more exciting man. The woman I'd loved for 10 years had chosen to become someone I didn't recognize, and as I walked away from that hospital room for the last time, I felt not anger but profound sadness for the marriage we'd destroyed with her choices. The trial began 8 months later, and what emerged in that courtroom was even more horrifying than what I'd already discovered. The prosecution's case revealed that Claire and Marcus hadn't just planned to rob me, they'd intended to stage my suicide by drowning, making it look like I'd walked into the Willamette River in a drug-induced state of despair over imaginary financial problems. The defendant researched tidal patterns, water temperature, and recovery statistics. The prosecutor explained to the jury, displaying Claire's browser history on a large screen. She calculated exactly how long my body would take to surface and what condition it would be in when found. Marcus's criminal history painted an even darker picture during his separate trial. FBI investigators had linked him to the suspicious deaths of 2 other husbands in Nevada and Arizona, both married to women he'd been involved with, both deaths initially ruled as suicides until the pattern emerged. Marcus Williams, whose real name is Michael Watson, has spent the last 8 years systematically targeting married women with substantial assets, testified FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez. He uses sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques to convince these women that killing their husbands is not only justified but necessary for their survival. The prosecution presented recordings of Claire's phone conversations with Marcus, captured during our surveillance operation, where she expressed not remorse but frustration that their first attempt had failed. "Maybe we should just shoot him and make it look like a robbery," she'd suggested during one particularly chilling call. "This poison thing is too complicated." Marcus had coached her responses, teaching her to think of me as an obstacle rather than a person, gradually dehumanizing me until murder seemed like a reasonable solution to their problems. During my victim impact statement, I focused not on revenge but on the profound betrayal of trust that had nearly cost me my life. Claire didn't just try to kill my body, I told the court, looking directly at her as she sat between her attorneys. She killed our marriage, our history, and every good memory we'd shared by choosing to see me as nothing more than a financial transaction. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Claire received 15 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud, while Marcus was sentenced to 30 years after being connected to those other suspicious deaths. As the bailiff led them away in shackles, Claire turned to look at me one last time, and I saw not the woman I'd married but a stranger who'd thrown away everything real for a fantasy that had never existed. The judge's final words stayed with me. Trust is the foundation of marriage, and when that trust is weaponized with intent to kill, it represents one of the most profound betrayals human beings can inflict on each other. Walking out of that courthouse, I realized that justice and revenge were entirely different things. I felt no satisfaction in Claire's punishment, only relief that the truth had been exposed and that other potential victims might be spared the horror Marcus had planned for them. 2 years later, I've rebuilt my life in ways I never thought possible after such complete betrayal. Therapy helped me understand that Claire's actions weren't a reflection of my worth as a husband or human being, but rather the result of choices she made when faced with consequences she couldn't handle. I started volunteering with a domestic violence organization that helps people recognize the warning signs of financial and emotional abuse, sharing my story with others who've experienced similar betrayals. It's strange how helping other people heal has been essential to my own recovery, turning my nightmare into something that might prevent others from suffering. I met Sarah at a grief counseling workshop, where she was working as a social worker helping trauma survivors navigate their recovery. She understood the long process of learning to trust again after betrayal, having worked with countless victims who'd been manipulated by people they loved. Trust isn't something you give all at once, she told me during one of our early conversations. It's something you build gradually with someone who proves they deserve it through consistent actions over time. Our relationship developed slowly and deliberately, with open communication about our fears, boundaries, and expectations. Sarah never made me feel broken or damaged by what I'd experienced. Instead, she helped me see that surviving betrayal had taught me valuable lessons about recognizing genuine love versus manipulation. We've been together for 18 months now, and what strikes me most is how different real partnership feels from what I thought I had with Claire. Sarah and I split expenses fairly, make decisions together, and support each other's goals without keeping score or expecting anything beyond mutual respect and affection. Mason, the young waiter who saved my life by speaking up that night, was accepted into the police academy and graduated last month as one of the top cadets in his class. He told me that witnessing Claire's crime and seeing how speaking the truth made a difference inspired him to pursue law enforcement as a career. Sometimes one moment of courage can change everything, he said when I attended his graduation ceremony. I'm glad I listened to my instincts that night. The house Claire and I shared has been sold, and I've bought a smaller place in a different neighborhood where every corner doesn't hold memories of a marriage that was apparently built on lies. I've learned to appreciate simple pleasures again. Cooking for myself, reading without distraction, taking long walks without constantly analyzing whether my companion's affection is genuine. The financial recovery took time, but Rita Chen helped me trace and recover most of the money Claire had stolen, and the insurance company paid out on the policies Marcus had planned to claim after my death. Sometimes I think about what my life would look like if Mason hadn't spoken up that night, if I'd drunk that poisoned champagne and never woken up to discover the truth. But mostly I focus on the future I'm building with Sarah, grateful that my capacity for love wasn't destroyed by Claire's betrayal and amazed that happiness can grow from the ashes of something so completely devastating when you have the courage to start over with someone who deserves your trust.